88 to 91 FM. BBC Radio 2.
For as long as people have gone to sea, the tradition of singing and writing about the ocean, that mysterious and unconquerable force of nature, which completely surrounds the British Isles, has been an important influence on our developing culture.
The sea calls out to an old hand to go sailing to new lands. They pay for your worth.
I'm Richard Hawley, and I've been investigating an alternative history of seafaring communities up and down the UK, on a tour that took me from the tip of the southwest coast of England to northeast Scotland. I've been hearing the songs, poetry and stories written by people who live with the ocean on their doorstep. I've also been speaking to artists who've been inspired to write about the sea, even if they live as far inland as I do in Sheffield.
If you're standing on the shore looking to the infinite, there's definitely a spiritual aspect, because how many places can you do that? If you're in the city, you're surrounded by concrete and you can't see off to the horizon like that. It's one of the places where you have an immediate and direct connection with the spiritual. That's the way I think of it.
That was Bell and Sebastian frontman Stuart Murdoch, trying to explain how the sea inspires a certain amount of spirituality and romanticism in human beings. From mermaids to the ancient god Neptune, the ocean conjures up a belief in the supernatural. It's also inspired Britain's authors to write some of the best fictional tales about adventure and discovery in our literary history. In this episode, I'll be finding out why. But for songwriter Robert Wyatt, there is one obvious reason for this.
If I had the job of thinking up a suitable god that's a sort of metaphor for life and our relationship to it, mine would have been, I would have two. I'd have a god and a goddess, and the god would be the sun and the goddess would be the sea.
You look different every time you come from the foam-crested brine. It's your skin shining softly in the moonlight.
If you think about life it started in the ocean, and that is the great womb from which we all come, and we still are water-based, and then we sort of go through a quick psychedelic version of evolution the 9 months before we're born. Well, we are then in liquid totally, and then have to sort of become land animals quick when we get out. Our first experience of life is 9 months in a womb, and to me that's an exact metaphor for life on the planet. So I do see the oceans as the womb of life.
Anyone who has lived by or worked on the sea knows only too well that nature cannot be tamed, and that their fate is at the mercy of a much greater force. The fishermen of North Yorkshire are no exception. We've just arrived in Filey, which is on the northeast coast. It's home to the Filey Fishermen's Choir, who we're about to meet in the pub. They started out as a Methodist preaching band around the time of the Methodist revival in the early 1800s. Methodism had a huge impact on fishing communities along the North Yorkshire coastline, because the preachers, they'd travel from place to place by boat, spreading the word. And just stood where I am now, I can see the lighthouse and the whole of the coast, and it's quite easy to see probably more efficient way to spread whatever messages the Methodists had by boat rather than by road. We met retired fisherman Jack Oxby, who sings with the Filey Fishermen's Choir. For Jack, the parallels between spiritual salvation and rescue from stormy seas are especially potent. He illustrated the life-threatening dangers that working fishermen would face on a daily basis.
People that were lost at Filey were lost mainly in the breakers landing. They had such small boats, 18-foot boats, whereas they now they're 30-foot, and of course it was sailing off. And when they were landing in the breakers, that's where the damage was done, that's when they were lost.
Well, the old saying, between a 2.5-inch plank between you and eternity. that I can kind of understand why you would need religion to make you even get in a boat.
I mean, the type of boats that we use, you won't have time to get your gear off. You just have to accept it. You know, I mean, if you hit anything or anything hit you, and you were going down, I mean, you won't have a chance to get your gear off or anything like that. You go. I think it was an accepted thing.
After spending only a few minutes in Jack's company, I became aware of just how fragile life is, especially when it's at the mercy of the ocean. Even the jumper he wore to meet us had a special pattern sewn onto it so that he could be identified in case he was drowned. The hymns recorded by the Filey Fisherman's choir, which talk about raging tempests and breakers ahead, seem to take on a whole new meaning.
Jesus Saviour part of me, this was a different part of me. These hymns that we sing in the Filey Fisherman's choir, the people who have wrote them, they've been there. Maybe they stood on the end of a pier or on a beach and they've seen it all and they've put it all together. And the last verse is, when at last I near the shore and the fearful breakers roar twixt me and the peaceful rest, then while leaning on thy breast, may I hear thee say to me, fear not, I will pilot thee. You're outside of the breakers, you see, you're waiting to land, and you have that faith. And I'll tell you this, I aren't ashamed to say it, I've said them words many times when I've been in that position.
The importance of faith to sailors became even more apparent during my visit to the Aberdeen Maritime Museum. There, the museum curator, Meredith Grayling, pointed out what looked to me like a model ship, but it turned out to have a much greater significance.
This is the votive ship model from a local church. I really love votive models because they're something that you would worship to or make offerings to. Like an altar, yeah, or something that you would focus on to focus your thoughts and prayers. And votive models are meant to be seen from below. They would be hung up high in the church, obviously quite dark, potentially just lit by candlelight. So the rigging is often quite outside, so the masts and spars are a bit too big. They don't look quite right when you see them on the level. But when you think of it being hung up high in the roof of a church and looked at from below, you can see it makes perfect sense. Of course, the rigging's slightly outside so that you can see it.
Drift away, sailor boys, on the deep sea. Worry no more, for you're safe now with me. Rest in my arms and my sleep.
They would be commissioned by people who relied on the sea for their livelihoods, so they'd be commissioned by captains coming back after a successful journey. They'd be commissioned by ship owners. They would be commissioned by local communities to pray for the men that were going off on the ships or passengers. This one, I love this one. It's named Agnes Oldwald of 1830, and it hung for many, many years in a local church in Denburn in Aberdeen.
It's no wonder that traditionally sailors have been very religious people, often with a strong Christian faith. But when you're battling with the elements, sometimes it's best to have as many gods on your side as possible, which I discovered as I continued my tour of the coast. After another slightly insane propeller plane journey from Cornwall, we stood in Whitby Harbour now, and I'm looking at a three-masted frigate ship which is beautiful, called the Grand Turk, which is moored in Whitby Harbour. It's pretty spectacular actually, and I'm happy because I'm near the sea. I don't really can hear any seagulls, but I can reliably tell you that there are. So, oh, there's one. There you go. We're going to meet the Watersons, Mike and Norma, which I'm really, really excited about.
jolly sailor lads, a fishing for the whale.
Norma Waterson and her brother Mike have lived by the coast in this area all their lives. Mike once worked at Trinity House in Hull, which is home to the General Lighthouse Authority for England. As he pointed out, the members of Trinity House tried to please as many higher authorities as possible.
All the lads used to have to go to chapel every day, and there's a set of steps up to the chapel, and halfway up is a mezzanine landing, and the god Oceana is there, and the orders were you take your cap off at the bottom of the steps so that you're not wearing a cap as you pass Oceana, or Neptune if you want to call him Neptune, and by the time you get into the chapel itself, you're not wearing your cap. But there is a nice little thought on, are you saluting Oceana or a Christian god, you know?
In our history, there are times, obviously, there must have been a period where there was like a crossover from sort of pagan times to Christian times, where this has kind of survived, I think.
The pagans and the Christians walked hand in hand. I mean, there was no big fight about it.
No.
They just...
It's making sure that you please everybody.
That's absolutely right, and I see nothing wrong in that.
No, yeah, nobody's left out, yeah.
Shoes on both feet.
Now the losing of 7 fine seamen, it grieved the captain sore.
And so, the lines between Christianity and every pagan deity under the sun become increasingly blurred for men at sea, whose lives depend on the look of the gods. And in traditional folk song, there's one time of year when pagan superstitions, Christianity and sailing all come together.
There are Christmas carols and carols throughout the year. That half of the carol is Christian and the other half of it is pagan. It's all pagan stuff.
I saw 3 ships come sailing by on Christmas Day, Christmas Day. I saw 3 ships come sailing by Christmas Day in the morning. I saw 3 ships come sailing by. Everybody knows that song. It's a fine Christian song. And in 1162, the Emperor Barbarossa, fearing for the holy relics in wherever they were, sent 3 ships to rescue them from the Moors. And they were so precious because these were crowns of gold. These were the skulls of the 3 wise men. Not crowns in the accepted sense of the word. These were crowns nappers. And they sent 3 ships because they were so precious, only 1 skull was allowed on each ship. And they're in Cologne Cathedral. And in the song, it says, where you gone? I'm gone to Colne on Rhine. On Christmas Day in the morning, they says they's gone to Colne on Rhine. Christmas Day, Christmas Day, it says they's gone to Colne on Rhine. On Christmas Day in the morning.
Sleep on, beloved, sleep and take thy rest.
The Watersons' rendition of the song, Sleep On, Beloved, an ode to a fisherman lost at sea, illustrates all too painfully the dangers faced by men who work on the ocean, and goes some way towards explaining the spirituality which I found to be deeply rooted in fishing villages all over the country.
Jesus loves thee best. Good night, good night, good night.
But it's not just the Christian god and pagan gods that sailors look to keep themselves safe. They also try to keep on the right side of that frightfully fickle lady called fate. Despite being staunch Methodists, the men in the fishermen's choir use superstition as a way to stave off danger.
Green is one of the worst things for a fisherman. You don't wear green.
Like religion and superstition kind of
come together.
They kind of go.
Yeah, they did. Yes, they do.
Scratching and backstay and all that stuff. You know.
Pig was the worst thing. You don't say a pig in front of my father. While we were at sea in the winter working long lines, we had a staff ashore baiting us another set for the following day when my father baited my lines. My wife lived uptown. 2 kids were like this. You pushed them down, called it the butcher's just across here, and MacDonald the butcher, he knew all the dodges, and he says, "Here you are." He says to
I want to meet him immediately. Yeah.
He says to my son, who was only 3 or 4, "Take this pig's tail down to your granddad." My dad said. My dad was baiting his line. He goes up to James. He says, "Mr. MacDonald sent that down for your granddad." God, it went crackers. Stopped baiting line. Started playing hell up. My mother played hell with him for being so stupid. Usually when they go ashore, they used to say, "Have you got anything? Are you caught out?" Didn't that day.
The ocean's ability to make the supernatural seem plausible extends way beyond religion and superstition. It's the vast unknown, and as long as humans have inhabited this earth, we've mythologized about the sea and the strange sights and sounds that emerge from its depths. Whether it's mermaids, sea monsters, or selkies, a strange creature that's half man and half seal. Again, the British folk tradition is full of songs about these mythical creatures, like this song, The Mermaid, which was recorded by Martin Carthy.
As I sailed out one day, being not far from land, there I saw a mermaid sat on a rock, calm and a glass in her hand.
Often it was the people left at home who let their imaginations run wild, while their loved ones were away sailing. Christina Stewart is a Gaelic folk singer from Inverness.
People lived with the constant idea on the land of kelpies and fairies who were a potential threat at all times. And then at the sea, you had the selkies and other sea creatures that they weren't necessarily on your side or not on your side. They're just not really interested in taking sides. So they could be a potential threat. You just don't know. And so there's that kind of jeopardy, I suppose, there. I think that because it is dangerous, people can go off on a boat on what appears to be a pretty calm day and a very normal day and never come back. And you don't know if they've gone off and found the island of the Selkies and settled down to live with them. You had that hope, I suppose, that they might have gone somewhere even better than where they're living at the moment.
A rationalisation of the unknown, in a way.
Yeah, trying to make sense of what you don't understand and don't want to believe, so you'd rather believe something better. Huva is naden, huva is naden. The Mermaid of Ballantor is a story from the East Coast, the East Highlands, where there's not so much Gaelic spoken now. There's a little, but not very much. And she's supposed to have been seen within living memory, but it's very similar to the Selkie story as well. So the mermaids and the Selkies were kind of tied together. The Selkies were specifically seal people, whereas the mermaids and the mermen, I suppose, were people that looked like people and were therefore easier to marry and have families with. And people, I've read accounts of people, checking under people's skirts to see if she walked with a limp. Maybe there was a tail under there that you couldn't see. So people certainly did, some of them, believe it. Chanias mochatos a chwaniach nuad fys bora syd an jich va min reid an gori vrachkan. Similar tales about mermaids and selkies exist in seaside towns all over the UK. In fact, I'm beginning to think there might be something in it. In a tiny village near Bodmin Moor, a group of folk singers, storytellers and entertainers had arranged a cabaret night in the local pub, and they very kindly invited me. Clive Piggott was one of the acts on the bill.
And it's a story about selkies. Selkies or silkies? They are seals, but on the land, they are humans. And this story was told to me by a man from St. Ives who had 7 wives. I first met my first wife 30 years ago it was. I was walking down along the Strand, and I noticed this beautiful woman sitting on the headland. She was combing crabs and little bits of seaweed out of her hair and singing a strange song. It sounded like the cry of a lonely seagull. I was entranced. Then my dog, he had a crab nip his nose. He gave a yelp and she turned round and she looked shocked. She stood up and she seemed to grab something that had been beside her and held it to her there. She started to shake and tremble. I said, "It's all right. My dog won't hurt you, my lover. Not at all. He's only a little thing there. Got a crab on his nose there." She just jumped off the rock into the sea. Well, I ran up to the headland there. I didn't see any sign of her at all until I saw her. A grey seal bobbing up out of the water with his dark brown eyes looking at me. No, it couldn't be. But it was.
The idea of a mythical world at the bottom of the sea, where creatures unknown to man exist, is one that's enchanted human beings for centuries, and still does to this day. John Bowden is the frontman with Sheffield band Bellowhead.
The wonderful thing about folk song is it preserves some very obscure superstitions that aren't otherwise preserved. There's a song that I sing called The Banks of Green Willow, which is a very... Well, it's all concerning the supernatural, or at least the perceived supernatural, and it's about a girl who goes on board ship, and she sort of takes the role of the albatross in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and the boat isn't moving, and so they decide that there must be fair folk on board ship, or fairies, and they cast the black bullets, which is a phrase I've not come across anywhere else, but presumably they throw bullets up in the air and they all land at the feet of this girl who happens to be married to the captain, and it's a fairly devastating story from that point on. He just puts her and her baby in a coffin and chucks her overboard, and she floats off. But there is a sort of suggestion that actually she isn't floating off dead, she may be swimming off, so maybe she's a mermaid, but it's quite mysteriously worded.
And he's thrown her right over both her and her baby, and it's see how she does swim, me boys, and it's see how she doth swagger.
We've already learned that it was usually the relatives of sailors who would write and sing about the ocean and life on board ship with a greater sense of idealism and romanticism. In Glasgow, I met Bell and Sebastian frontman Stuart Murdoch in his local cafe. Stuart was brought up in Ayr, a port on the Firth of the Clyde. But for him, going to sea is nothing more than a fantasy.
I'll lend you 200 quid for a flight across the ocean. Maybe things will look better then, 'cause it couldn't seem much worse than tears and a curse.
I'm pretty much the only one in the family who didn't go to sea. Even my extended family are all seafaring, so it looms large in my family's sort of legend. And I think maybe sometimes because you are the one that's left behind, then you perhaps tend to romanticise.
It's quite interesting you say that, because you've got a parallel directly with Robert Louis Stevenson, because all the Stevensons, they built the lighthouses. But Robert Louis Stevenson was a sickly child, he was very ill, but he wrote probably the most famous book about the sea, which is Treasure Island, from an armchair.
Absolutely. I would say my favourite book when I was young, certainly about the sea, wasn't such a seafaring one, but it was Robert Louis Stevenson. It was Kidnapped. Yeah, even the scenes from Kidnapped about the sea are amazing.
Just then we came to the top of the hill and looked down on the ferry and the Hope. The Firth of Forth, as is very well known, narrows at this point to the width of a good-sized river, which makes a convenient ferry going north and turns the upper reach into a landlocked haven for all manner of ships. Right in the midst of the narrows.
I can appreciate that quite often happens. It is the one that's left behind. We, in a sense, we're like the bards of the village who don't take part in the battle, but write all the sort of the glorious stories about what went on with a large dose of romanticism.
I had lived all my life in the inland hills, and just 2 days before had my first sight of the Firth, lying like a blue floor, and the sailed ships moving on the face of it, no bigger than toys. One thing with another, I made up my mind.
Simon Armitage is a man after my own heart. He lives, probably, as far away from the ocean as you can possibly get in the UK. But Simon is still fascinated by the reverence people have for the sea and the rituals which take place in coastal towns and villages. He gave us a sneak preview of an as-yet unpublished poem that he was inspired to write while on holiday in St Ives.
The place where we stay there is there's a beach, Porthminster Beach, right in front of it, and I think there's a hotel at the back, the Porthminster Hotel. I think they have a lot of wedding receptions there, and what's quite odd is that you can be sat on the beach and suddenly there will be this vision of satin or silk sort of floating across the beach there, and you know the bride and the bridegroom, I don't know whether it's traditional or what, come down to the water, and I think they have some photographs taken there, but they're often barefooted as well, and it's sort of blinking you miss, and then they just seem to disappear into married life. I'm not quite sure if I've finished this, so I might make a bit of it up in the middle. Beach wedding. Being just a stone's throw from the pretty church, they often tumble out onto the beach, unworldly creatures, the bride herself a sudden vision of satins or silks among stripy towels and inflatable sharks, the groom in a morning suit, stalking the sand in bare feet, wearing his shoes on his hands. She'll hitch her dress as far as her garter, he'll carry her some way into the water. Setting out for Atlantis, they pause here on the brink of departure. Her long train floats on the surface and drifts and darkens. Each empty evening a figure arrives in a shooting jacket and combat trousers, combing the beach with a metal detector, grubbing for coins or keys, sweeping for mines. The shovel hooked on the back of his belt drags behind him like the devil's tail, ploughing a furrow, marking his lone trail. A high tide does its work, panning for gold, resetting the sand before first light, while under a white sheet, husband and wife lie badly wounded after the first fight.
You lead me down to the ocean.
The sea will always be a place where religious ceremonies, superstition and mythology are found in abundance. We probably know more about life in space than life at the bottom of the ocean. And any gaps in our knowledge of that mass of water, which touches us all, will inevitably be filled with flights of the imagination. Next week, we'll be looking at songs, stories and customs inspired by the numerous jobs done at sea, from shanties to shipbuilders' choirs and communist pop songs.
You'd be on board a ship, there'd probably be a lot of noise. I suppose part of the point of singing those songs was to try and get you through a pretty unpleasant task. Those songs, I guess, are designed to keep people's spirits up, and so everybody's got to kind of join in.
That was Jarvis Cocker, who is only one of the people we'll be speaking to as we continue our tour of the coast to find out more about seafaring industries in the UK and the songs sung by men who toiled on board ship. You've been listening to The Ocean with me, Richard Hawley. The producer was Elizabeth Alker, and this has been a Smooth Operations production for BBC Radio 2.